I should probably admit something before I tell you the rest. When my girlfriend dumped me, I thought the worst part of my life had already happened. I was wrong, because the real moment that changed everything came the next morning, when her mother knocked on my door and said something no one should ever hear. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The breakup happened on a Wednesday night, the kind of quiet evening where nothing feels dramatic until suddenly everything is. Sophia called around 7. Her voice sounded strange, flat, careful, like someone trying not to step on broken glass. "Can you come over?" she asked. Those 4 words should have warned me. When I walked into her apartment, the first thing I noticed was the silence. No music, no TV. Just her sitting on the couch with her arms crossed like she was protecting herself from something. Or maybe from me. I sat across from her. For a full minute, neither of us spoke. Then she exhaled slowly and said something that made my stomach drop. "I can't do this anymore." You know that moment when your brain refuses to understand a sentence? "That was me." "What do you mean?" I asked. She rubbed her temples like I was asking a complicated question. "I need freedom, Ryan. I need to focus on my life, my career, my goals." Her voice didn't sound angry. It sounded relieved, like she had already rehearsed this conversation in her head 100 times. I asked if there was someone else. She shook her head. "No, I just don't want to be tied down." 6 years together, and somehow the way she said it made it sound like I was a backpack she had been carrying too long. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I just nodded, stood up, and walked out. But what I didn't know as I drove home that night was that Sophia ending things wasn't the real shock. The real shock was waiting at my door the next morning, and when I opened it, her mother was standing there, looking at me like she had been waiting years to say something. I told myself I was only staying because she was grieving. That was the responsible explanation, the safe one. But if I'm being honest with you, the moment I said yes, something inside me shifted. "Of course," I said quietly. "I can stay." Olivia let out a breath like she had been holding it for hours. "Just the couch," she added quickly. "I don't want the house to feel empty tonight." The way she said empty made the word sound heavier than it should have. We sat at the kitchen table a little longer while she finished the soup. The clock on the wall ticked loudly between us, filling the silence neither of us knew how to manage. Her eyes looked tired. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes, the kind that lives somewhere deeper. "Everyone left so fast after the funeral," she said suddenly, staring at the table. "I don't blame them. People don't know what to do with grief." I nodded slowly. "I didn't either," I admitted. She looked up then, surprised. "You've lost someone before?" I hesitated. "Yeah," I said. "Just differently." For a second it looked like she wanted to ask more, but she didn't. Instead, she gave a small, sad smile. "Thank you for the soup," she said softly, "and for not pretending you have the right words." That was the moment something subtle changed between us. Not romance, not yet, but trust. Later I grabbed a blanket from the hallway closet, and I remember the exact moment the air in my apartment stopped feeling normal. Margaret took another step closer, and suddenly we weren't standing on opposite sides of the room anymore. We were only a few feet apart, too close for a casual conversation. She folded her hands together like she was steadying herself. "I know how this sounds," she said quietly, "but if I leave today without saying it, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." My brain tried to prepare for a dozen possibilities. None of them were what came next. "Ryan, you deserve someone who actually sees you." That sentence landed heavier than I expected, because the truth was, I hadn't felt seen in a long time. Not by Sophia, not by anyone. Margaret watched my face carefully like she was measuring whether to keep going. Then she said something that made my chest tighten. "I started noticing you 2 years ago." I blinked. "Not as my daughter's boyfriend," she clarified softly. "As you." I didn't know what that meant, but the way she said it made the room feel smaller. "There was this dinner," she continued. "Sophia spent the entire night on her phone, while you kept trying to pull her into the conversation." Her jaw tightened slightly. "And you still smiled. You still helped clean the dishes. You still asked me about my work." I remembered that dinner. At the time it felt ordinary. Apparently it wasn't. Margaret exhaled slowly. "That night I went home angry. Not at you, at myself." I frowned. "Why?" Her eyes met mine again. "Because I realized something uncomfortable." She hesitated, just for a second. Then she said it. I hadn't felt that respected in my own marriage for 20 years. The words hung between us. I suddenly didn't know where to look. And then she added something that made my pulse stumble. "And the worst part, Ryan, was realizing I couldn't stop thinking about you after that." My throat went dry, because suddenly this conversation wasn't about sympathy anymore. It was about something far more dangerous, and I had a feeling the real secret still hadn't been said yet. I didn't know where to look after she said that. My brain kept trying to force the conversation back into something normal, something safe. But nothing about the way Margaret was looking at me felt safe anymore. It felt honest, dangerously honest. "I know what you're thinking," she said quietly. I almost laughed. "You actually don't," I replied. Because the truth was, my thoughts were a complete mess. This was Sophia's mother, the woman who hosted Thanksgiving dinners, the woman who used to hug me goodbye at family gatherings. And now she was standing in my living room, telling me she couldn't stop thinking about me. Margaret noticed the tension in my face. "You don't have to say anything," she said quickly. "I'm not here to pressure you." Her voice softened. I just couldn't keep pretending I didn't feel something. I rubbed the back of my neck, trying to slow my racing thoughts. "When did this start?" I asked. She took a breath. 2 years ago was when I noticed it," she admitted. "But the truth is..." The feeling didn't go away. The room went quiet again. Outside, I could hear a car passing on the street. Somewhere a dog barked, ordinary sounds. But inside my apartment, everything felt like it had tilted sideways. "I'm divorced, Ryan," she continued. 5 years now. I knew that part already. Her marriage had ended quietly, no drama. Just distance and silence from what Sophia once told me. Margaret crossed her arms almost protectively. I spent most of my life ignoring what I felt because it looked inconvenient. Her eyes met mine again. I promised myself after the divorce that if I ever felt something real again, I wouldn't run from it. My chest tightened, because the way she said real didn't sound dramatic. It sounded calm, certain. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. She wrote something quickly on the back and set it on the kitchen counter. "You don't need to answer today," she said gently. I looked down at the card, her number. Then she said one more thing before walking toward the door, something that stayed in my head for days afterward. "You spent 6 years trying to prove you were worth loving." She paused. "I just wanted you to know. Someone already knows you are." And then she left, leaving me alone in a silent apartment, staring at her number. For 4 days, I didn't touch the card. Not because I forgot about it. Actually, the opposite. I thought about it constantly. The small white rectangle sat on my kitchen counter like it was quietly watching me. Every time I walked past it, my brain started the same argument all over again. This is insane. This is wrong. This is Sophia's mother. But another voice inside me kept whispering something uncomfortable. "Someone finally saw you." I went back to work the next morning, trying to push everything out of my head. I pulled wire through concrete walls, installed breakers, checked panels. The kind of work that normally calmed my mind. But my focus kept slipping. Every few minutes I felt my phone in my pocket like it weighed twice as much as usual. By the third night, sleep became impossible. I kept replaying Margaret standing in my living room. The way she looked at me when she said she had been noticing me for 2 years. Not flirting, not manipulating, just telling the truth. And the strange part? No one had ever talked about me like that before. On the 4th night, I finally picked up the card. I stared at the number for a long time. My thumbs hovered over the screen while I typed messages and erased them again. This is probably a bad idea. Delete. Maybe we should talk. Delete. Everything sounded dramatic or stupid. Finally, I sent 2 simple words. "Dinner this week?" The reply came almost immediately. Too quickly to be casual. I would like that. I stared at the message longer than I should have, because suddenly this wasn't just a strange conversation in my apartment anymore. Now it was real. We chose Tuesday. 7 o'clock, a small Italian place downtown with dim lights and quiet tables. All weekend my mind kept asking the same question. Was I about to make the worst decision of my life, or the one decision that would finally change it? Tuesday came faster than I expected, and when Margaret walked into that restaurant, I realized something immediately. I had never actually seen her before, not like this. And the woman walking toward my table was nothing like Sophia's mother. When Margaret walked into the restaurant, I almost didn't recognize her. Not because she looked different, but because she looked confident in a way I had never noticed before. At family dinners, she always dressed simple. Neutral colors, comfortable clothes, the kind of quiet presence that blends into the background. But that night she wore a deep red dress. Nothing flashy, just elegant. And the way she walked across the room made it clear she knew exactly where she was going. My table. For a second I forgot to stand up. She smiled slightly when she reached me. "Hi, Ryan." Her voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something nervous she was trying to hide. "Hi," I replied, finally finding my feet. We sat down. The waiter came quickly. Water for me. A glass of wine for her. For the first few minutes we talked about safe things. Work. Traffic. The ridiculous heat in Austin that week. But both of us knew that wasn't why we were there. Finally, Margaret set her wine glass down and looked straight at me. "We should probably talk about the obvious thing," she said softly. I nodded. "Yeah, probably." She folded her hands on the table. "People are going to judge this," she said. "No hesitation. No pretending. They'll think you're rebounding. They'll think I'm taking advantage of you. They'll think it's some kind of revenge against Sophia." Her honesty caught me off guard, because she wasn't trying to make it sound romantic. She was telling the truth. Then she added quietly, "And Sophia might never forgive me." That part sat heavy between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said something I hadn't planned to say. "I spent 6 years trying to convince someone I was worth building a future with." Margaret's eyes softened. "And you shouldn't have had to." I studied her face then, the small lines around her eyes, the way she actually listened instead of waiting to speak. And a strange thought slipped into my mind. For 6 years I had been looking in the wrong direction. I took a slow breath. "When did you start feeling this way about me?" Margaret hesitated. Then she told me something that made my heart skip. "About 2 years ago, after a dinner where Sophia barely looked at you once." Margaret didn't look away after saying that. She just watched my face like she wanted to see exactly how the truth landed. "That dinner bothered me more than it should have," she admitted quietly. "Not just because of Sophia." I leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean?" She exhaled slowly, gathering the words. "I went home angry that night," she said. "At my daughter, but mostly at myself." I frowned. "Why yourself?" "Because I recognized something." Her fingers traced the rim of her wine glass before she continued. "I spent 23 years married to a man who barely noticed I existed." The way she said it wasn't dramatic, just tired, matter of fact. "Same dinner table," she continued softly. "Same conversations where I talked and he nodded without hearing me. Same feeling of being." Background noise. She looked back up at me. "And that night I watched Sophia do the same thing to you." The words hit harder than I expected, because she was right. I remembered that dinner clearly now. Sophia scrolling through her phone while I tried to keep the conversation alive. At the time I told myself it wasn't a big deal, but Margaret saw it differently. "That's when I started noticing you," she said. "Not as my daughter's boyfriend. As a person." Her eyes softened slightly. "The way you asked about my work like it mattered. The way you helped clean up without anyone asking. The way you actually listened when people talked." I rubbed my thumb against the edge of the table. No one had ever described me like that before. "I tried to ignore it," Margaret added. "For a long time." "Why?" She smiled faintly. "Because admitting it felt dangerous." The word hung between us. Then she said something that made my chest tighten again. "But every holiday after that, every dinner, every conversation, it got harder to pretend I didn't feel something." I swallowed slowly. "And now?" I asked. Margaret didn't hesitate. "Now I'm tired of pretending." The honesty in her voice made the room feel suddenly smaller, because in that moment I realized something unsettling. Walking away from this dinner would be easy, but staying might change both of our lives forever, and I wasn't sure which choice scared me more. I didn't answer her right away, not because I didn't know what I felt, but because I was finally admitting it to myself. The truth was I had spent the entire week replaying her words in my head. "Someone finally saw you." That sentence had followed me everywhere. Work, the grocery store, lying awake at night staring at the ceiling. And sitting across from her now, I realized something uncomfortable. I felt calmer here than I had felt in months, maybe years. Margaret watched me carefully. "I know this is complicated," she said softly. "You don't owe me anything, Ryan." Her tone carried no pressure, just honesty. "If you decide this feels wrong, we can walk out of this restaurant and never talk about it again." That option sat there between us like an open door. I could stand up, leave, move on, find someone closer to my age, someone easier to explain to friends and family, someone who didn't come with a history that tangled everything together. But when I pictured that future, it felt empty. I took a slow breath. "I don't want to walk away." The words came out quieter than I expected. Margaret didn't speak immediately. She just studied my face, making sure I meant it. "You're sure?" she asked gently. "No," I admitted with a small laugh. Her eyebrow lifted slightly. "I'm hurt," I continued. "And confused. And honestly. A little scared." That made her smile faintly. "Good," she said. "Good?" "Yes," she replied. "Because that means you're taking this seriously." The waiter brought our food then, but neither of us touched it. There was something more important happening between us. Margaret leaned forward slightly. "I'm not asking you for promises," she said quietly. "Just honesty." Her eyes held mine. Let's just see where this goes. I nodded slowly. For the first time since Sophia ended things, the future didn't feel like a blank wall anymore. It felt uncertain, messy, maybe even reckless, but also strangely hopeful. And as Margaret reached across the table and lightly touched my hand for the first time, I realized something I hadn't expected. This wasn't just about healing from a breakup anymore. It was the beginning of something far more complicated. And neither of us had any idea how much it was about to change our lives. For the next few months, we moved carefully, not secretly exactly, just quietly. Margaret called it giving the world time to catch up later. Most mornings started the same way: coffee before work, a small cafe 2 blocks from my job site where no one knew us. We talked about ordinary things: her marketing firm, my construction projects, books she liked, movies I had never heard of. But underneath those normal conversations, something deeper kept growing. Small moments. The way her voice softened when she said my name. The way she listened without interrupting. The way silence between us never felt awkward. One night we were walking along the river downtown when she slipped her hand into mine for the first time. Not dramatic, not hesitant, just natural. And somehow that small gesture made my chest feel lighter than it had in years. Still, reality hovered in the background. Every now and then one of us would mention Sophia. The name always landed like a quiet weight between us. One evening, Margaret finally said what we were both thinking. Sooner or later, people will find out. I nodded. I know. Her fingers tightened slightly around mine. And when they do, it might get ugly. She wasn't exaggerating. We both understood how it would look from the outside. A 29-year-old man dating his ex-girlfriend's mother. It sounded like the kind of story people whispered about, judged, mocked. But the strange part was, none of that scared me as much as losing what we had built. I don't care what people say, I told her honestly. Margaret stopped walking then. She looked at me carefully like she was studying something fragile. You might care later, she said quietly. When the questions start. What questions? Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. Questions about why you're really with me. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? Margaret hesitated, and for the first time since we started seeing each other, I saw fear in her eyes, the kind of fear that comes from a thought someone has been carrying alone. Ryan, she said softly, are you sure this isn't just revenge? The question hit harder than I expected, because suddenly I realized something. If I couldn't answer that honestly, everything we were building could fall apart. Her question stayed in the air longer than I expected. Are you sure this isn't just revenge? For a moment I didn't answer, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to make sure the answer was real. Margaret watched my face carefully like she was bracing for something painful. I wondered the same thing at first, I admitted quietly. Her shoulders tensed slightly. But revenge feels angry, I continued. And being with you doesn't feel like anger. The tension in her expression softened just a little. It feels peaceful. That word surprised both of us. I leaned back slightly and looked at her. You know what the strangest part is? What? She asked softly. For 6 years I kept trying to prove I was worth choosing. I shook my head slowly. With Sophia it always felt like I was standing outside a door, hoping someone might let me in. Margaret didn't interrupt. She just listened. But with you, I said, meeting her eyes again, I never felt like I had to prove anything. Her fingers tightened around her wine glass. You already saw me. That was the difference. Not excitement, not drama. Just recognition. Margaret's eyes filled slightly, but she blinked the emotion away. I was afraid you'd wake up one day and realize I'm too complicated, she admitted. I smiled faintly. You're not complicated. No? You're honest. The word hung between us. Honesty was what started this whole strange story. The doorbell, the card on my counter, the moment she walked into my broken life and refused to pretend she felt nothing. I reached across the table and took her hand. Let's not pretend this will be easy, I said. She nodded. It definitely won't be. But maybe easy isn't the point. Margaret looked at me curiously. Then what is? I squeezed her hand gently. Choosing the person who actually chooses you back. For the first time that night, she smiled without hesitation. And somehow in that quiet little restaurant I realized something unexpected. My girlfriend dumping me wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of the life I never saw coming.